Kathy. Welcome to the Colorful Homeschooler Podcast, where we parlay on productivity, personality, passions, education, and theory. I'm a lover of Jesus, a wife of 20 years, and a homeschool mama of 4 special needs boys who keep me constantly active. I'm so glad you're here to join me. Pull up a chair. There's space for you at this table. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back. So we're just finishing up our Charlotte Mason notebooking series with our social studies notebooks. And this includes our history, timelines, book of centuries, citizenship book, and some others. Let's just dive right in. This is secondary to the nature notebook, the one that most people know of, and that's the book of centuries. Now, I promise we're going to deep dive for a few minutes into book of centuries. But first, I just want to show the scaffolded view of history that Charlotte Mason took with her different notebooking options. So, the scaffolding view starts with the child's own history. Then it builds to a bird's eye view, and finally to close quarters tools. Now, if you notice the child's own history, this is known. And we fast forward through the years, through the understanding of the child, to the unknown, which comes down to the close quarters tools. And we're going to go through all of those. So the child's timeline should be highly visible. So let's put it up on the wall. Let's make sure that they're seeing it all the time. The thing you're going to start with is their last birthday. So they remember that. They were physically present at it. They understand that it happened and that it didn't happen today. They may not have a true concept of time yet, but they're able to recognize, hey, I had a birthday. It wasn't today because I'm not still eating cake or whatever you have in your house. So therefore, that happened in the past. That's what you start with, their last birthday. Eventually, you may be able to add in their birth. And again, they're going to recognize they were there for that, but they don't remember it. So we're spreading their view a little bit from what they absolutely remember to now something that they don't remember, but they believe happened, and that they were somehow present for it, even though they can't remember it. You may be able to put a sibling's birth on there prior to writing their birth down if they were present for it, and they remember it, right? If they have a younger sibling that is around now, that they're still able to remember the birth. That can go also. Next, you might move to some family events like Grandpa's 80th birthday party, because the child was there and will remember it, will remember the people who were there. So you want to add that because, again, that's a highly visible time place in the child's life. When the habit of thinking historically becomes doable for the child, then I don't want you to jump to, Julius Caesar. Next, I want you to add in a public event, such as a parade or a fair. The child still was there, so we're holding true to that. But this is a public event. It wasn't for them or their family. There were many families there. So we're widening their view a little bit more. So now that goes on the timeline. Maybe you went to the state fair this year or 4th of July parade. Next, how about national events in their own life? Elections. Yes, elections, even little kids know about those these days. What if your little was alive during something like COVID? God forbid there was ever anything like that again. But something big that's consistently in their face, in the news, whatever, around affecting their life. So some national events. Maybe a big scientific discovery. Okay, maybe something about the new rocket or space or a medical device that affects them. So that would go next on. It's a national event, but it's involved in their personal lives. When this is understood, okay, we talked about Grandpa's 80th birthday. Well, now we're going to bring things from Grandpa's time and put it on the timeline. So this is a person still alive from their time right now, from the child's time. The person is still alive, but now we're putting events on their calendar that are before the child was alive, but this person they know was alive. Does that make sense? So I'm in my child's life. I don't have any littles anymore, but if I did, I'm in my child's life, and you might say, maybe when I was younger and I first learned to ride my bike, or maybe when mommy and daddy got married, or maybe when grandma and grandpa got married, or maybe when Vietnam began and maybe a grandparent was present in Vietnam, or the Korean War, right? These are things that were way before the child, but they encompass someone that the child knows and loves. That's the end of the child's own history. And now we're widening out to that next level, bringing in a little more unknown, and this is called the bird's eye view. Now, there are a couple of options within this, the table of history or the stream of history, and we're going to go over both of those in a minute. So the table of history, the students would complete this. They now understand that they live in a century. There were others who lived in centuries also. So the table of history is one sheet of poster-sized paper on the wall. You have 20 columns for 20 centuries, 1000 BC to 1000 AD, with Christ right in the middle in 0. Children under 9 have been reading hero tales and the ancients. So you're going to be doing this up until the end of Form 1, part of Form 2. So you want your children under 9 to be completing a table of history. And in each of the century columns, you would write one name. So Alexander, Julius Caesar, Jesus Christ. These are their hero tales. These are their ancients. You want your child to get a view of history that I exist in one century and there were others that existed in other centuries. Now, this can also be met. So this is the bird's eye view. So we have table of history or a map of centuries. This is another idea where it would again be a poster-sized piece of paper on the wall. And instead of being 20 columns, you now have a grid with the century labeled and a defining event from each. So the map of centuries, say you would have 1000 AD, and you would put a specific defining event in there, then 1100, then 1200. One event is all that you get in there. So that's the map of centuries. The map of centuries is the grid, or the table of history is the columns. Which would your child respond better to? This depends on if they're a visual learner and in which way they like to organize their understanding. So as you're widening out to this bird's eye view, how have they taken the child's own history that they have hung up very visibly? Okay, next you would move forward to the stream of history. This is a larger scale, and you're looking at Form 4+. So you're looking at high school. These are periods of 10 years. Now this is produced by the student. It's flexible to what the student is interested in. It makes it personal, and you get one line per year. So this is not a book of centuries where we're fitting in all different things. This is a specific compression of that year. What actually happened that year that was the biggest event for this child? What struck them the most? So that's the bird's eye view. And finally, we come even further out to go deeper in to close quarters. Now, this is an in-depth descent into a specific time period or a biography of a specific person, and then doing a stream of timeline on that person or that specific time period. So, if my child, for example, is extremely interested in flight, well, they might do a close quarters timeline assessment, such as a stream of history, specifically on different events that happened in flight and the development of the science of flight. And this would be his deep dive. Now, another child might read a biography on Marco Polo and create a beautiful artistic representation of the life of Marco Polo in a timeline form or a stream of history form or even a table of history form. But instead of doing centuries or blocks of 10 years, they would lower it down and come deeper in on each subject. So this enables the student to take control of a certain smaller time period and really flesh it out in a timeline way. So that is the scaffolding of history that Charlotte Mason employed. Now, another option that we didn't talk about was the century chart. The century chart would be Form 3+. This is similar to the map of centuries, but it's within one century. So you have 100 squares, and this per year, each square equals a year, and it shows the position of some event to another to get a relative layout of that century. Now, the century chart covers political history, church history, literary history, scientific discovery, but you're not writing anything on the grid. You're actually making a symbol, and the symbol is what tells you what happened that year in relation to something else. So for science, for Marie Curie discovering radiation, maybe you put a little test tube beaker and you color it in neon blue because she thought it was so pretty. Or was it green? I don't remember, but it was that bright color. So you put that as your specific sketch for that year because that was very interesting to your child. Again, this is student-led. They are owning this. So not since the child's own history and maybe a little bit of help with the beginning of the bird's eye view, like the table of history or the map of centuries. After those, it becomes really child-led. So that was the century chart. Again, it's Form 3 plus, 100 squares in a grid, and each square equals a year. You don't write, you draw a little symbol. So this is a much more pictographic visual representation. Okay, now let's get into it. Let's talk about our Book of Centuries. Now, a Book of Centuries is not a compressed timeline in a book. I did that for several years. We just wrote everything down in our Book of Centuries. But when I really dove into the research for this episode and reread Mason's different qualifications of the Book of Centuries, I realized I hadn't really stayed true to the philosophy because I didn't remember it. Not because of my continuing mantra to all of you, make the philosophy work for you, don't work for the philosophy. I actually like the way that she talks about it much better. I just forgot. So the way the Book of Centuries works is, again, very student-led. What they do is they only get one side of, say, a salt and pepper notebook for each century. So they have to very carefully select what they want on the timeline. So, for example, 1900 would be one side. The left side would be for choosing what goes in there. The right side, for every century, they're going to choose a specific theme. Say they're really interested in weaponry. Then they might begin all the way back in ancient times with what was a common weapon, and they'll draw it and maybe right next to it the culture that used it. And then forward through time on every page, they track the development of weaponry with 1 or 2 sketches only for each century to be able to really look at it and see, okay, so we moved all the way from spears and atlatls all the way up to these, fully automatic machine guns or the atomic bomb, whatever is the most recent weaponry that your child would be allowed to study. What about transportation or the arts or music or theater? So drawing a specific sketch on each page to represent that in that century, the printing press or the spread of knowledge, because in the beginning it was oral tradition handed down from family to family all the way up through today where it's a lot of online. So that's an option too. Scientific discovery. I mean, there's so many. So left side of the paper is for writing down only what the child selects from that century, and the right side is for sketching out something amazing that they track through time. So that was the Book of Centuries. I love this idea, and I'm definitely thinking of implementing this in our next year so that we can be more true to the philosophy because I want to. Finally, I want to bring up a citizenship notebook. So this threw me for a loop when I got to Form 4. I was like, what is a citizenship notebook? So I had to go back and read some of her writings. I also did some research and found a couple of articles from the PNEU in regards to the citizenship notebook. One of the things that was included in there was the way of the will. Another was the map of man's soul. Another was current events narrations. And then government or civics narrations. So let's talk about each of these. So the way of the will is very interesting. Both of these, way of the will and map of man's soul, were only done in the mid to upper grades. So your child would be between 12 to 18 years old. The way of the will is all about what it means to be human and to choose, to have agency in your choices. And I love this. The way of the will is a chart that would go within the citizenship notebook. And you would choose a character, real or fictional, and place them on either side of the line. Are they choosing and willing to do what they need to do? Are they using their agency to pick? Or are they being buffeted about by those things that are around them and not really exercising any agency, but just being carried along with their life, carried along by life, probably making some pretty poor decisions? Are they going along with the crowd on impulses? Are they rash? And this will also help the student to learn that characters don't easily fit on either side of the line. Sometimes I choose very deliberately, and I exercise a lot of agency. And other times I'm just dragged along by circumstances. So is everyone. Build the child's muscle in being able to see this and being able to figure out during which time the character used agency and which time they were just carried along. So that's the way of the will chart. Next is the map of man's soul. Now, Ourselves was a book that Charlotte wrote. Some people think of it as philosophy. I think of it as symbolic literature. It's beautifully written, and it's almost a journey through ourselves. And it shows the child in many ways what it means to be a human, and again, to choose. So she calls this person that you're traveling around inside of the country of man's soul. So man's soul, very clever. And my children will draw their maps as they're listening to me read aloud from Ourselves. The child can read by themselves and then would just do a written narration map when they're done. And this map just helps them to remember where we have visited and what each character within us or inside man's soul, what they do inside of us. What difference do they make? How do we stay away from the daemons or the negative side? And how do we move towards the positive side of each of these traits? This is a map of human nature, a visual narration of what they're hearing in the book Ourselves. Current events narrations in the Citizenship Notebook are just that. I have my son twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week if there's a lot going on in the news, but at least twice a week. He reads an article from different collected websites that I have okayed for him, and then he summarizes it and gives me a written narration, usually a full, thick paragraph. I really want to know that he read it. And as Cindy Rollins has said, inspect what you expect. So make sure your child is truly reading the current events. Now, I also have given some tougher assignments within the Citizenship Notebook on current events where I asked him to read on a specific topic across 3 or 4 different news websites. And again, I will curate those because I don't want him reading trash, but I will make them from extremely different sides of the aisle. And then after he reads 4 different articles on the same situation that's going on from vastly different ideologies, I then ask him to compare and contrast what was that person's viewpoint. Who are they reaching out to? What details are they leaving out? What details are they putting in? Did they share charts and graphs that looked very different on either side? Can you print those out and compare them? Did they have different X and Y axis values? Because that will make the chart look very different. So I do this so that hopefully when my child leaves, he can recognize bias, because all news media has bias, and he can decide what he thinks the basic truth is. What is the core truth at the heart of the different news stories? I really wanted him to be able to do this. So that was another thing we did in current events in our Citizenship Notebook. and also any government or civics work. We did constitutional law with Michael Ferris for 1 year, so I kept all that in the citizenship notebook also. Those are all the government civics things that we have done, plus any elections work, or we talked a lot about the State of the Union address and went through some historical examples of that. I had him write some copy work of great aphorisms that were brought up in State of the Union addresses. I looked those up, and some of them I already knew. And from those, we added that as well to the citizenship notebook. So that's an overview of that. And finally, the calendar of events might go in your citizenship notebook. This was also recommended for Form 4+. And again, this is a diary of current events. So I didn't do exactly this, but I love the idea. I may do it for my upcoming into Form 4 child who will start Form 4 next year. This is a daily news roundup. So every day they just write in as if it's a daily timeline, the different news events, and perhaps they pick 3 and they detail a little something about each of them every day. And that will just help them to follow a story through from inception to completion. And also to recognize when the news media drops a story because it just isn't getting enough views anymore. And the sad state of that we no longer get to hear what happened in that particular story. That's also something important for our children to go into the world understanding. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It is just a fact of the 24-hour news cycle, though. So these are Charlotte Mason's historical notebooks, her social studies notebooks. Hopefully you've really enjoyed this series, practical and specific on Charlotte Mason philosophy and the different notebooks that she espoused. Please follow the show for more encouraging and practical homeschool content. And please come over to Instagram and follow me. I've really been trying to put out some interesting, funny, and encouraging content for homeschool moms out there, as well as those of you who love fitness and health and fashion and just having fun. Subscribe to my show, new episodes every Tuesday, and we've got some good ones coming up soon. We're going down a planning route soon. I'm going to go over different kinds of scheduling options, as well as how to turn nature study into earth science for high school, and getting ready to plan your next homeschool year. Thank you so much for joining me. And ladies, I believe in you.